Welcome everyone to the University of Applied Research and Development's Emergency Response and Risk Management podcast and videocast. I'm delighted to have with us Christian Tubbs, who is the Fire Chief at the Southern Marin Fire Protection District, and he's been leading there for the last 6 years. He's a graduate of Harvard, Grand Canyon University, and many others in the Naval Postgraduate Academy as well. So we're delighted to have our esteemed guest with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate the invitation, and I am really looking forward to chatting with you today.
Thank you. Why don't you tell us about your role that you're doing now and what it entails?
So, as you noted, I've been with the Southern Marin Fire Protection District for about 6 years. As the fire chief in a special district, it's a little bit different role than in municipal government. The role of fire chief is similar, but in a municipal government, a fire chief typically reports to a city manager or a mayor if it's a strong mayor type of government structure. In a fire protection district, you don't have a city manager, you are the manager. As a matter of fact, it's often referred to, and our title is fire chief / district manager. So in many ways, there's a parallel to that. And so what this particular agency serves on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge, a very diverse community, a very diverse environment, and we can certainly get into talking about that a little bit later.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the context within which you need to manage and the challenges there as well.
Sure. So it's actually kind of fascinating because it's not strictly in as a fire district. So in 2014, when I arrived, the district was already in discussions with a neighboring municipal fire department to share services. The district was still dealing with the implications from the Great Recession and looking for ways to be a little bit more economically efficient. So this led to a discussion about an opportunity to share services, specifically at the battalion chief's role. And the battalion chief role is a mid-management level role in the fire service. They are typically the most senior role in what we would call the operations division, so our field folks, the people who respond to calls, and are often the individuals who are the incident commanders in multi-company operations. So when we have more than one unit respond, we need somebody, much like a conductor in an orchestra, we need somebody who is doing that work with the fire resources in order to mitigate whatever problem it is that we've responded to. And so this has led to this year, there's been a series of steps over the last 6 years, but ultimately what it has led to is I now am the fire chief of both the City of Mill Valley Fire Department and for the Southern Marin Fire Protection District. The Southern Marin Fire Protection District also provides fire services to the city of Sausalito. They annexed their services into the district back in 2012. So as a result, to your question a little bit about my job, I have 3 governing boards that I report to. I only work for one. I have one boss, but because I'm the fire chief for 3 separate agencies, that means I have a very busy life. I attend a lot of meetings. So there are staff meetings in the city of Sausalito. There are staff meetings in the city of Mill Valley. I have my own internal staff meetings. There are council meetings that I have to do presentations at for the city of Mill Valley, the city of Sausalito, and the board of directors. So that is mostly what keeps me really, really busy. But what helps me with that is I got a tremendous staff. I have 2 deputy chiefs underneath me, one who manages operations and training, and the other personnel and admin. I have a division chief fire marshal who handles our prevention division. There's some exciting stuff going on in there. I'll look forward to sharing a little bit about that. But that's a little bit about what the job of the fire chief is. It's, really you're coordinating with partnering agencies, not just in the fire lane, but across government as a whole, local government. And then, of course, we coordinate with county and state and federal resources as well.
Yes, I was going to ask you about the interesting initiatives or strategies that you're looking forward to implementing going forward. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, so probably the biggest one, besides the shared services, which we believe is we're on a track for consolidation with Mill Valley Fire Department and perhaps other agencies, is in the fire prevention lane. So I think a lot of people are aware that California, much like Western Australia, has large wildfires every year. And in California, this problem has increased significantly. 2017, 2018 were very, very bad years. That created a tremendous amount of political and public energy, especially in my county, which is a very affluent community. As a result of that, two things happened that have affected my agency. One is that in 2018, we went to the voters to ask for a tax increase, what's called a parcel tax increase, in order to expand our prevention bureau and in large part to be able to provide some level of service in the wildfire prevention lane. So our agency, like all California fire agencies, participates in the statewide Mutual Aid Act, meaning we send firefighters wherever there's fires in California. But as we all know, it's much better to prevent an incident than to respond to it. It's generally much more economically attractive. And if we can prevent damage, that's always a better course of action. But my agency didn't have the resources for that. We were successful in 2018 in securing that money. That led to, not our initiative, but eventually what happened as part of some ongoing work, and again, another bad fire year, grand jury report, it led to a county-wide measure that occurred in March of this year called Measure C. And Measure C raises about $20 million a year and is allowing us to expand county-wide on a regional approach a number of initiatives that are really around public education and prevention activities such as vegetation management, creating defensible space inspections, fuel reduction, a number of things like that. So that's an initiative that we're very excited about because we've never had funding for it before. And it's not only funded, but it's very politically supported. And that's really important to really helping achieve success.
Interesting that you said that prevention is so much more powerful. How do you go about identifying areas or researching and finding out the opportunities to prevent?
That's a great question. So if, let me provide, I guess, just a little bit of background. So if, some of your viewers may not have heard of what's called the America's Burning Report. This was a report that was commissioned by the Nixon administration in the 70s, early 70s, when Richard Nixon was in office. And it identified a national problem in the United States related to fire in regards to loss of property and loss of life. A couple of things came from that. Probably the most important was the creation of the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And one of the missions of the Fire Academy was to become a central location for collection of data, because there was no national database at that time. And so it's hard to identify solutions if you don't have any data. So the commission recognized that and said, we've got to go do this. The other thing that the Fire Academy was set up for was to begin to move the fire service from a trade to a profession. And how we do that, of course, is that you have to have a body of knowledge, and that body of knowledge has to lead to both research and then outcomes from that, right? So this is going to the heart of your question about how do we do that. What we've discovered over the years is that prevention is probably one of the most successful strategies in reducing loss of life and property damage. Measuring or demonstrating how much you prevent is far more difficult. In other words, if I have a city manager that says to me, Chris, we spent $1 million last year on fire prevention. How many fires did we prevent? How do I prove a negative? Well, we've come up with ways to do that, actually. And what we know is that there's really 4 E's when we talk about risk management, and this includes sort of prevention. It's the whole web, or the whole set of options you have, strategies you have. So you have education, you have enforcement, you have emergency response, and I'm being interviewed and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth. It'll come to me. Anyways, each of those strategies plays a role in preventing either the incident from occurring, fire from occurring, or you intervene and you limit its damage. And so what we do to help demonstrate the effectiveness of our work is we certainly provide outputs. In other words, how many inspections do we conduct? How many violations do we find? What are those kinds of violations? When we put inspection programs in place and we follow them up with training and education, can we see a decline in certain types of violations? So we would measure what would be called the counterfactual, and I don't know if that's a familiar term. I mean, anyone who does, you know, sort of those kinds of performance analyses, counterfactual is a term I think people would be familiar with. They love that term at Harvard, by the way. But another thing that we do is we like to take what we would call the pre-incident value. So let's say we have an apartment fire, and I'll use one we had last year. We had a building that was estimated in value before anything occurred at about $20 million. Now, after the fire, the insurance company, along with our investigators, conducts an inspection, and from that, they make a determination on the loss. It doesn't typically include the contents for our purposes, but it includes the loss as a result of damage to the property and the structure. Well, when we take those two numbers, we can then produce, as a result of simple math, what we would call a loss preservation number. So in this case, we had about $800,000 in damage, which means from a $15 million structure, we had approximately $14.2 million in preservation. And we know that the 4 strategies were major contributors to that. We also recognize that individual behavior is a part, very difficult to measure, but we can then align that with how many times did we inspect that occupancy, did we have violations, was the cause of the fire related to any of those violations? So we can begin to sort of couple that data and paint a picture, and some of that helps us understand the effectiveness of the various strategies that we take.
I'd be interested to hear, because you have a very significant role, and what you do every day has an impact for millions of people. From the training, the programs, the education that you've done, which of those trainings really stands out to you from the Naval Graduate Academy or from Harvard or whatever you've done? Yeah. What really stands out as having a big impact on you and your role?
I would say it is less about the particular school or the course, it's more the journey. I've been in the fire service 41 years now, and when I started, I was in the process of trying to complete my AA degree. I actually didn't finish my undergrad until I was 40 years old. I'm, in all transparency, I'm 59. I'll be 60 this year. So I didn't finish my undergrad until I was 40, and I finished my first master's when I was 41. Now, what drove me to do my move from my AA to my undergrad was actually the National Fire Academy. So I attended the National Fire Academy and a program they have there called the Executive Fire Officer Program. And this is what introduces you to the importance of building a body of knowledge and making decisions based on analysis, research and analysis. Now, I had no previous experience, and as part of that program, at the time was a 4-year program, each year, in order to go to the next year, you had to write an applied research project, which was a peer-reviewed paper. It was essentially a mini thesis, is what it was. I had never had any experience with that. I discovered from that process that I really enjoyed research and I really enjoyed analysis, and I've always enjoyed writing, so it was a perfect marriage. So where this became, I guess, a little bit of a passion, which has led into this journey, is because of my love for what I do, this being in this business, recognizing that part of the challenge that we have with our elected leaders is funding, right? And so, again, as I used the example a minute ago, prove to me how many fires you prevented so I can give you the funding next year. So local government is always challenged with how are we demonstrating value, some sort of equity to dollar in and some widget or service on the backside, right? And so this is a fascinating area for me because I wanted to make sure that my business was getting the funding that we needed. It's a public value equation, another big Harvard term, they love that. But what came from that was inadvertently, I found myself hungry to learn, and that's not stopped. So I didn't need a second master's degree. The Naval Postgraduate School has an incredible reputation. They have one of the most difficult grad programs in the U.S. They have the best Homeland Security program in the U.S. as rated by News Report. And I was very familiar with the program. I'd actually been on the campus on another program called the Executive Leaders Program. And a part of me is like, I want the challenge. I want to go back to school. I want to see, it was kind of like in my mind, like the SEAL training of master's programs. Could I meet that challenge? And could I learn something from that and build new relationships that would benefit this work that I'm trying to do? So there's a bit of a long-winded answer, and I apologize, but to your point, what I've learned is the journey to never stop being a student is critically important, because the byproduct of that is that if you remain curious and you continue to seek to learn, you will continue to learn, and you will find things that will help you navigate whatever challenges you're having in government, and you will build a network of contacts and friends that are yet another depth of resource that you can rely upon. And in my 41 years, I've built relationships across the world, but especially throughout the United States, from local all the way to the federal government, something when I started 41 years ago, I never dreamed of in my life. I thought, I'm just gonna be a firefighter, right? I'll go to work and I'll go on calls and I'll help people and it'll be great. And 41 years later, I look back at my journey, I'm like, wow, what an adventure. I could never have predicted that. I am a big education fan, and just, I think the benefits are tremendous.
Wonderful. That's really powerful what you said. I'm making furious notes as you're speaking. I love that. Just before we wrap up, obviously education's a biggie. What are some other career advice points or pearls of wisdom that you could give people looking to make a career out of emergency response?
I think that those who have an interest in this need to come with a bit of a passion. Like anything, I think that when we engage in something that we love, it is less work, and really it fulfills us. In other words, what is your purpose? And I think that's a fundamental question people have to ask themselves, is what defines you as an individual? What gives you reason to get out of bed every day, and what is it when you get to sort of the end of your life and you're looking back that you want to be able to reflect on and say, this is what my life, how my life mattered, besides just about me, but what was my contribution? I think that's significant. The other thing that I think that advice that I would give to people is the importance of character and relationships. Trust is probably the most valuable commodity that you have in government, and probably in the private sector as well. And so this gets to this issue of character. And as I tell my firefighters, especially the ones that are very involved in politics at the labor level, that sometimes want to take the heavy sort of labor hammer approach, I tell them that what I've learned in my career is that's the most ineffective way to move your issues forward. The most effective way is to build relationships with your partners, and if that's, that includes your bosses, and take a vested interest in what their needs are. Because when you do that, you create a bond, you create an element of trust, and the byproduct of that is they are naturally going to want to know what's important to you. And that becomes a foundation in which you collectively can create solutions.
That's really great. Thank you. I know you're really busy, and you volunteer in community as well. I saw that on your LinkedIn profile. We'd love to reach out to you again in a few years' time and see what's changed and what's moved on as well. But thank you so much for giving your time tonight to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig, and I look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you.